people that sold the money. Like, they didn't really care. Like, there was a lot of, there was an instance that has been documented that the local provider of mutton was kind of racist, I should say kind of, was racist. It was like, well, there's JAPs over there, so we'll just send, rotten meat, because we know we're gonna get the money, and we don't care if they eat it or not. And so there was documented evidence of sometimes they'll just get rancid meat, but then what the cooks would do was still cook it so they could at least visually look like your plate is full, but they'll tell them don't eat it. And so the quality of food wasn't great when they were coming in, because at first there was a lot of canned food and whatnot. But again, how Minidoka was created was that they wanted to make it agricultural. So eventually they started to farm in the fields. So there was several hundred acres that they're cultivating. And eventually the person who was in charge of the Minidoka World Relocation Center, his name was Harry L. Stafford, he was the director out here. When war broke out, he actually wanted to serve his nation, but he was too old to go to the military, so he's like, I could be an administrator. So he ended up getting placed out here. And at first, he thought that he was supporting the government in this war effort, but as he started to meet people and realized, oh, these are just people in a really bad situation. He actually wrote in his diary saying the most unfortunate aspect of Minidoka was that it was in operation. So he actually worked with the incarcerees to try to make things the best he could within the bureaucracy that he worked in. So a lot of the Nisei men and women were advocating, hey, mom and dad or elders, they need better food. We need more ethnically appropriate food. And so he's like, yeah, what do you need? So they're growing napa out here. They had daikon, bobo, and then they even had soy. So Minidoka actually had a tofu factory, because eventually a lot of the elders were suffering from food poisoning and other aspects. Please stay on this side of the stanchion, thank you. Because yeah, it's a little bit unstable there. So anyways, yeah, so those opportunities for ethnically appropriate vegetables being grown, but that wasn't within the first year. That was like, after the second year and third year. So at first, you get a lot of people coming in with food poisoning, so a lot of food poisoning happening. There was a hospital on site that was kind of more at the front entrance. I'll point that out to when we get up to the guard tower. Yeah, so, but it was kind of, the quality of medical care wasn't even that great either, because there is a story of a woman whose water broke, so she walked to the hospital and knocked on the door, and at the time, there wasn't Japanese American doctors, because when the camps first opened, it was mostly white employees that were there, and very few Japanese Americans were employed. But eventually they did hire Japanese Americans, both incarcerees, but also people from like the rest of Idaho. Because there were people who were Japanese Americans who lived in Twin Falls and Jerome and were not incarcerated because they were beyond the exclusion zone. So that's just another nuance to the story. But anyway, she knocks on the doors like, hey, my water broke, I'm in labor, and the doctor's like, yeah, we're closed. So she had to walk back to her barrack, and the story is that her barrack was about a mile and a half, so she ended up giving birth on the way back to her barrack. So although, yes, there was a hospital medical care, it wasn't necessarily to a high standard. There was an issue actually out here as well with medical malpractice, where, so I used to work for the Idaho State Historical Society as well before I started to work for the feds. And we had an object from Minidoka, and I remember, I was always curious about it. I'm like, why do we have an autoclave? And then as I started to work here, I found out that there was a spreading of venereal diseases because they weren't able to clean the instruments well. And so what happened was, at first they thought it was like an epidemic because of, people doing stuff. And then they realized it's because they don't know if they can't clean the instruments well. So that's why the government forced them to buy an autoclave. And then that's what we have in our collection when I was working at the Historical Society. But I didn't get to understand the whole story until I was here and found out about this issue, because it was written out in the year here. So, so those are some of the conditions that people had to kind of live through. And sorry, I know I just totally bounced to the hospital. But let's get back to my talk here. Folks who were at first assigned to different jobs, so you may get a cook that never cooked before. And so again, quality of now the food that was prepared varied throughout within different barracks. Because sometimes someone who owned a restaurant or was a chef would volunteer and be like, yeah, I can do that, right? But then sometimes you had blocks that didn't have anyone that could cook. So, and then you also hear stories about kids where, kids are growing, like, the food that was provided was just sustenance. It wasn't gonna make you full. It wasn't gonna be something that's gonna, get to your cravings. So the kids kind of found this hack where they're like, oh, if we line up at one block early, we can eat, run to another block that has little food, and go eat over there. So there started to be this issue where there wasn't enough food. And then so at one point in time, they actually had to kind of, not necessarily as like a ration card, but it's like a coupon book where it's like, you only get one meal. And it has to be in your block, because then other blocks that had a really good cook may not have enough food for their block. Because the thing is that in one block, I mentioned that there's basically 12 barracks, right? And then there's 6 units per barrack. So you could technically have 72 different families. And that's there's just this one mess hall that's doing breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the 72. So that's why they, at one point in time, the camp administrators had to kind of clamp down on it just to make sure that there was enough food for everyone. So after the closing of the camp, we mentioned that, buildings are sold and whatnot and moved off property. So there was 644 buildings out here in Minidoka that needed to go away because they need to clear the land for agricultural purposes. So this building was then taken to the Jerome County Fairgrounds where it was used for canning. So it's been modified. You can kind of see that there's this weird silver paint. I don't understand what that is. But there's also an I-beam that's been installed right above this front row. And so this I-beam was installed because when you're canning and you have these big pots, there was on a little system where they could just like hook it up and then move it over. So you're not carrying these pots. So normally, if you were to go on the outside, you'll see a pitch. So that's been modified, because normally the roof would just be going out to the side without having these pitches. But it was moved back, I want to say it's like 2008 to 2010-ish or so, from the county, because the county no longer wanted to use it. And then they're like, hey, do you want it back? So you can kind of see how they cut the building, I think it was in thirds, and then moved it out here. So, let's see. On time. Any quick questions before we go to the barrack? Oh, yeah, I don't know exactly what this was used for, but it was part of the canning process. Like, I never canned, so I don't know. And it's actually like, I guess it's not just canning, it's mass production canning. Right? So, but yeah, that's definitely one. So, yeah. A couple other stuff, I guess, before we go, because I think we do have a little bit extra time. Is that, this mess hall structure contributed to the breakdown of family structure. Because especially if families were in a multi-generational household, if grandma and grandpa can't come and get their food, mom and dad will normally come get food, the kids are then eating with their friends and whatnot. So you didn't have the traditional structure of being able to sit down together as a family. And that just continued to contribute to the breakdown of the family structure that I think still affects many of us today, with the generational trauma that was passed down through that. So anyways, okay, so we're now going to exit and we're going to go to the right into the barrack.